And good morning to all of you, and welcome to our College Academic Distributions Requirement presentation, Caters and Admissions Considerations and Trends in 2018. And this presentation is in partnership between the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, OSPI, the Washington Student Achievement Council, WSAC, and the Council of Presidents, COP. Two of their institutions will be represented in today's presentation. And so here are your presenters today. I am going to lead it off. My name is Stephanie. I serve as one of the Associate Directors for Academic Affairs and Policy with the Washington Student Achievement Council. We also have Kim Rigdal from OSPI, as well as Lisa Ireland. And then we have two representatives, admissions, or directors of admissions, Matthew Siski from Central Washington University and James Miller from UW-Bothell. And here's a roadmap for the next hour. We are going to delve into the Caters. And so what exactly is the purpose of the Caters? Who is involved in setting the Caters? What are the Caters? And then the role of K-12 and districts to determine the Caters. We get a lot of questions around this topic. And so what can K-12 do to support the transcription of Caters? And then more importantly, why it matters to correctly transcribe Caters on a student transcript. We'll then have a conversation about higher education and Washington State, and specifically we're going to delve into Washington's 6 public 4-year baccalaureate institutions in our state, the role of admissions officers. So what do they do and what do they don't do? We'll talk a little bit about that. Admissions, so current trends, emerging trends that we are seeing in Washington State. And then Caters myths, what else do you need to know? And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the myths that are out there relative to how our post-secondary institutions, specifically the public baccalaureates in Washington State, think about Caters as part of the admissions process in our state. So to kick us off, I just wanted to put up a couple definitions. I think it's always good to set the conversation in terms of defining what we are talking about. And so when we say the term Caters, the college academic distribution requirements, we are talking about high school courses that students must pass to meet one of the minimum standards for admissions at public baccalaureates in Washington State. I also do want to point out that these could also be college courses, and so thinking about dual credit, they can meet the Cater requirements as well. And then in terms of minimum college admission standards, these apply to Washington public baccalaureate institutions. They're in agreement on a set of minimum standards for admissions to their institutions. And you can see below the 6 public baccalaureate institutions in Washington State. And then I just want to say that I think in Washington, we really are lucky in that we have a very diverse and robust higher ed institutions in our state. And so while today's presentation is going to focus on Caters and the minimum admission standards relative to the public baccalaureate institutions, the 4-year public baccalaureate institutions, we have a great CTC. We have 34 CTCs operating in Washington State, as well as 10 independent colleges in Washington State. And so we always want to recognize that there are multiple pathways for students to go on to pursue their education after high school. So this is a report I actually came across this week. I wanted to highlight it because it's a report from the Center for American Progress. Our high school diploma is really a ticket to college and work. And it was an audit of state high school graduation requirements and alignments with college entrance requirements. And so if you're like me and really like to read more in depth about kind of post-secondary persistence, enrollment, high school grad requirements, and alignment, this is a great synopsis of kind of what is happening nationally relative to this conversation. And one of the highlights for Washington is that we are actually pretty well aligned in our high school graduation requirements and the minimum requirements for entry into post-secondary, with the exception of the world language requirement. So that's a great resource if you just want to see kind of how our state compares relative to some of the other states along each of the CATRs that we'll talk about in a minute. So the purpose of the minimum college admission standards is to ensure that students are well prepared to be successful in achieving their post-secondary education goals. And the standards encourage diversity in our Washington student population by really recognizing, and I want to highlight the word, multiple measures of college preparedness, including alternate routes to traditional admissions pathways. CATRs is one component of the minimum admission standards, but it's not the only piece. And I'll highlight the other aspects of the minimum college admissions requirements in a moment. But again, I think the highlights here are that, you know, multiple measures are really important as we think about assessing students for admission to our public baccalaureate institutions, and CATRs is one way to do that. So here's a overview of both the CATRs and then the two other areas that are considered part of the minimum college admission standards at Washington Public four-year baccalaureates in our state. I will not go over each of them, but you're probably familiar with most of these. That again, CATRs, which is on the left side of the screen, the GPA requirement, which is maintaining at least a 2.0 cumulative GPA. We do not have weighted GPAs in Washington State. And then taking the SAT or ACT and having those scores sent directly to the institution. Two things to point out. One, where you see 2 credits of science, this is changing to 3 credits. So those students who will be entering summer fall of 2021 will need to have 3 credits of science. The 3rd credit does not need to be a lab science. And I may have our admissions directors who are on the phone maybe speak a little bit more in depth when we come to their portion of the presentation. I just want to highlight that. And then again, these are minimums, and so institutions may ask for more. And again, I think our representatives from Central and UW-Bothell can talk a little bit about holistic review and some of the other aspects that are involved in admissions decisions. So many times we get the question about who sets the CATRs. And so WSAC, the foundations are in Washington State Statute, 28B.77.020, 7A, for those that would like to go in and find more information on them. But really, it's a collaborative effort. We don't decisions around CATRs are not informed by the agency alone. We do that in partnership with the State Board, OSPI, COP, SBCTC, and the WTP. And so anytime there is a major change to CATRs, 2015 was the last major update, I believe, with the science, alignment of the science standard, that those groups come together and collectively participate and inform the discussion about where the CATRs go. And I think the benefit of that is that you have multiple sectors, both K-12 and higher education, thinking through what those CATRs should look like. And so that's not an independent decision that's made by the agency. Great.
So before we start rolling with the OSPI portion of today's presentation. Wanted to just give a second for anyone to type a question you may have into the box on your screen and send that to us if you have anything that has come up for you with regards to the information that Stephanie just covered with you. And we'll give you just a second here to see if anything comes in on that. And we will, of course, keep pausing for questions as we go through the presentation. So if anything comes up as we are going, please feel free to type those in and we'll try to address them either in the moment if it is connected to what we're talking about, or towards the end when we actually open it up for more Q&A. So not seeing anything specifically at the moment, I'm going to go ahead and dive in to the K-12 portion of today's presentation. So again, my name is Kim Rakedahl, and you may have noticed that I am the program supervisor for dual credit, which obviously plays a role in college admissions. But I come from a background of school counseling and spent 17 years working with students specifically on this process. And so am here with my colleague Lisa Ireland, who is our transcript data research and now analyst guru of all gurus. And so she is going to be also here for questions that you may have specifically as we go through some of this information, and then to share some more about transcript issues related to CATERS. We're filling in for Danny Sackleson, who some of you may know has retired from OSPI, and we miss her a lot, but I'm going to do my best to fill in for Ms. Danny as we transition into some new roles here at OSPI with filling her very, very big shoes. So wanted to just share with you a little bit today about the CATERS from a K-12 perspective. And what I have linked to you here in the box where it says for more detailed information is the document that Stephanie and the Student Achievement Council maintain that has considerably more detail about the CATERS and how students can meet them specifically than I will most likely cover in the presentation portion. So again, if I mention something and it prompts a question and you need a little bit more meat than what we're providing, please feel free to send that in via the question box. So I'm following the basic premise of the document that WSAC keeps up for us. So on the left-hand side, as you saw already on the handout that Stephanie showed you visually, those are the required college admissions credits for the four-year institutions in the state of Washington. We'll look a little bit further down the line here at how that compares to what students now need to do in order to graduate. But these are the basic minimum requirements for college admissions. And then as we talk today, we're going to take a look at 3 different things to be considering when you are working with students and they are trying to meet those admissions requirements and also their grad recs. Is how are we identifying those catered courses, and what does that mean for you on your end of things if you're in that K-12 space and are working with students on knowing which courses they have access to that can meet those CATERS and how that fits within their 4-year plan. We'll talk a little bit about earning credits and how the high school credits and potentially dual credits that students might earn can count as CATERS. And then last but not least, we'll talk a bit about course scheduling and that 4-year planning piece. How does all of this fit together as we advise our students in meeting their graduation requirements and their future planning requirements, whatever those may be? Today we're looking at 4-year college admissions. So let's talk a little bit about who decides which high school courses meet CATERS. And essentially, while Stephanie is absolutely correct, we have a collaborative effort at the state level to talk about what are the CATERS that are needed in order to ensure that our students are graduating with the right courses that will prepare them to be successful in those 4-year universities. It is the school districts themselves that look at each high school course that is offered within your course catalog and determine which of those are aligned and meet the requirements that have been set up by the state for what can be considered a CATER. So that is a district level decision, and some other things that need to be really clear at the district level that again kind of bleed in a little bit to some of our issues around transcription is to ensure that that B course designator, which is the letter we use for CATERS, Not quite sure how it became B, but we go with it. That is the designator that needs to be assigned within your student information system for your CEDARS submissions as aligned to those courses that are counting as a cater within your school system. And then finally, last but not least, is ensuring that on your high school transcript, that B course designation is showing up right next to those courses that are meeting those cater requirements. And that really helps our partners on the other end in higher ed who are doing the admissions work, which I'm sure you'll hear more about this from our guests today, really helps them to be able to see that the student has met those minimum entry requirements. Because as I'm sure you all know, we do not call all our courses the same thing, and we can come up with some pretty funky names for things. So this is a really important piece of the admissions process for our partners in higher ed to understand that those courses have been aligned with those state level requirements for what would be considered a college admissions course. So when it comes to earning credits for high school graduation and for college admissions, we've got two basic ways in which that happens. Obviously, every high school is assigning a credit component to your coursework based on your bell schedule typically. We are seeing a wider variety of credit designations and bell schedules and transcripts. So this is a really key piece of, again, helping our higher ed partners to understand not only the rigor of the work that students are doing by using that course designator, but also the amount of content that they're covering with that high school credit. And we do have some of our partners in higher ed each year when we do the fall counselor tour that tell us they probably would estimate around a third of our high school transcripts are coming to them really clear and easily understood with our designations and our course titles and our high school credit pieces. So this is a really important part of the process that K-12 can do to help our friends on the other end better understand what our students are actually accomplishing. So the length of your academic term may vary. We are now seeing some schools that have chosen to go to that 5-period trimester where students are actually earning a 0.5 in a trimester because they've lengthened the course of the day, as opposed to a 0.33 when you keep a 6 or 7 period day in a trimester format. We've got, of course, block schedules where students may be earning a full 1.0 credit within that first semester because they're only taking 4 classes at a time. The typical 6 to 7 period day, which is typically that 0.5 credit per semester. So lots of variety. Want to make sure we're really clear with designating those credit pieces. And then for students who are engaging in dual credit and who are earning college credit while they are in high school and wanting those to be counted towards their caters, you can see the conversion rate on your screen as set in our statute. And I've linked you to that RCW in case you are curious. And like Stephanie said, want to go reading those additional details so you have that greater information. But typically 5 college, quarter credits or 3 college semester credits are going to equal that 1.0 high school credit. So depending on the way in which your students are engaging in those dual credit opportunities, that may show differently in your transcripting. Again, kind of aligned with your bell schedule and the way in which you are breaking down your own transcript into semesters, trimesters, or quarters. But those pieces are hopefully clear to you in terms of what that conversion rate looks like from the college's perspective going into that high school environment. So I want to talk a little bit about course scheduling and planning and run you through a little bit of what does it look like to try to ensure that a student is meeting all of their cater requirements while they are also meeting their graduation requirements. So on the left-hand side is the really great visual that the State Board of Ed created several years ago when the 24 credit career and college ready high school diploma grad recs were set. And of course, this is for the class of 2019 and beyond, unless you're one of those lucky districts that got a waiver and is not going to actually be held accountable for these 24 credits until 2021. But otherwise, most of us, it is this year's junior class who will be the first ones held to these 24 credits. And you'll see just from the coloring and sort of the visual side of that diagram on the left, it's not really Core 24, even though that was a really cool name. And I'm first to say I love things that rhyme. And it was so cool to say it that way, but really it's not, because there are 17 core credits that are required for high school graduation. And you'll notice these are the blue ones here. Those are typically in alignment with our CATER requirements, as Stephanie said earlier. So the state of Washington has raised the bar in recent years for our high school graduation, but you'll also notice they've put in some flexibility. And this is where that high school and beyond plan becomes really critical in your work with your students, so that they can be articulating with you what their plans are going into that junior, senior year and beyond, because those green credits down below, which signify a student's personalized plan or personalized pathway, those are the 3 flexible credits that our state basically said, we've got 24 required for graduation, but we know not all students are necessarily wanting to go down the same path. And we want to ensure that there's some flexibility for students who have different interests and goals beyond high school. So those 2 credits of world language, as of the class of 2019, those will now be graduation requirements in the state of Washington, which is in alignment with our CATERs. And then we did add that 2nd credit of art as an additional grad rec. Those are the ones that, depending on a student's post-high school plan, if they can articulate that they are not headed towards that 4-year college directly after high school, that they have another path in mind, and that there are courses either in their high school or through other means that they believe will better prepare them for the pathway that they intend to pursue, documentation of that in their high school and beyond plan would then allow that student to have that graduation requirement waived, and for those other classes to count as personalized pathway credits instead of core credits. Obviously, we need to have that discussion with our students when they are making those decisions, that they are essentially shutting a door that could potentially be open to them right after high school. Not that they still couldn't get there through other pathways, through the 2-year college system, the military, apprenticeships, and other means, but we do want to be really upfront when we're guiding students through this gauntlet of credits, that they really understand how they are choosing to keep doors open or close them temporarily, with a potential to open them up back later. So then, of course, they have their 4 electives, and so all told, those 3 personalized pathways, 17 core, and 4 electives add up to equal that 24 credits. So I've put together for you just a really basic sample for your plan for what would be considered a 4-year bound college student. Nothing super fancy, but it meets the minimums. And so I want to walk you through a little bit of thinking around, okay, when I look at that 4-year plan, can I recognize which courses actually count as CATERs? All of them are going to be meeting the graduation requirements for that student. But I want you to look at that 9th grade year and the 6 courses that I've listed here. So I went with just the traditional 6-period day, since that's still the most common bell schedule that classes or that schools are keeping. And it is sort of putting that box around those 24 credits of students needing to meet all of the courses that they take. So when you look at that first column, think in your mind, which of those 6 courses would be meeting CATERs? And I'm going to give you just a second to take a look at that.
There's one question about, in the sample schedule, where are the 2nd art credits? Where's the...
That's a great question. So I will get to that when I get to junior year. Okay. So I want you to take a look at this. If we're looking just at freshman year, if you take a look at the courses that are considered CATERs, 5 of the 6 classes that that student would be taking in that freshman year meet our CATERs requirements. For English, math, science, the choir, of course, counts as one of their art, and then world language is world language. So 5 in 1 year, nothing wrong with that. Take a look at sophomore year. If we look at the sophomore year, what do you believe would be counted as a CATER for sophomore year? Knowing, again, we need to have a minimum of 3 each year. So looking at our sophomore year, we hit the magic arrow. We again have 5 courses that are counting towards those caters. That second year of English, the second year of math, a second science. We have our first year of social studies and the second year of world language. So now's where it gets a little bit more interesting, right? So the question around the second credit of art. Granted, that is a high school graduation requirement. And in this particular case, this student has made a decision around an interest in marketing. They take it as a junior, still in good shape with their high school grad recs, no red flags at that point. So they take that course, and in doing so, they meet more of their caters. You'll notice that we are now down to 3 plus 1. Mm-hmm. One that's got a little caveat to it. So the English 11 is self-explanatory. The math, of course, is self-explanatory. We know kids need to get through Algebra 2. The U.S. history is easy because that one, of course, gives them that second year of social studies. The CAM, I put a caveat on that a little bit because, again, this is now for the class of 2021, as Stephanie mentioned, where that third year of science is going to be required. So while you may have current seniors and juniors who don't have a third science course that is not yet required for caters, however, if you look back at our chart on the left-hand side, if you are a school that is a class of 2019, new grad recs and 24 credit requirements, they do need that third credit of science. So little caveat on that, a little slightly different color to draw your attention to that, because depending on your school district and whether or not 2019 is your year or 2021, the cater alignment may be off a little bit until that 2021 year. And then notice, of course, that the world language, we have now met the 2 years that are required for caters. So it is no longer required for graduation or for college admissions, but is a great next step for those students wanting to get into those four-year universities. And then marketing is their OC-Ed. And then last but not least, when we look at the senior year, we again have some caveats here. And this is where it gets a little more fun and interesting for those of us that work with students and advise them on meeting college admissions as well as graduation requirements and ensuring a meaningful senior year, especially in that area of math. And so this particular student, as we see, only got to Algebra 2 as a junior. So this student needs some kind of senior year math quantitative course. What I have in slightly different yellows that looks much more better on my screen than the one I see up in front of me, and hopefully it looks a little bit more different to you, is that in this particular case, the student is taking 2 classes that technically could count as that senior year quantitative course. Their stats course as well as their physics course could technically count there. In an interest of trying to ensure that the student is continuing with a math, since they did choose to take a math, I would imagine that would be the one we would be more inclined to put the B next to for this particular student, since it is an actual math course as opposed to physics. But I will also let our guests from Central and UW-Bothell share their perspectives on that as well, in terms of whether it makes a difference on their end. I just see the alignment there with the math seems to be more indicative of earning that B and the Q for the quantitative course designator for this senior year. And then the other piece I put on here with a double asterisk for you is I put that civics course requirement. As we know, that is a new standalone senior social studies requirement that will be going into effect next fall for the class of 2019. And so that is in direct alignment with our caters, in direct alignment with our grad recs. And so I just wanted to highlight that as we continue to try to ensure that schools are aware of that change in that social studies requirement to needing at least a half of a credit of a standalone civics course, rather than it being integrated into other courses, as many of our schools have been doing prior to this next school year. And then because the student was so excited about marketing and so invested in that pathway and loved it so much, they chose to take advanced marketing instead of their second year of art for graduation, mind you. And so that is why there isn't a second art credit for graduation, but they have met the CATRs for art with their choir course from freshman year.
One thing I do want to mention, and thank you, Andrea, for your question about how the math requirement interacts with the senior year quant requirement. WSAC has actually put together a handout. This is probably one of the more confusing CATRs to understand because there's a few tracks for how this can happen. And so we've tried to tease this apart with a fast track. So thinking about students that maybe taking algebra as early as 7th or 8th grade and complete very early to kind of your typical track. So freshman, sophomore, junior year, and then the senior year with the senior quant, and then maybe a student that has a repeat of a course in there. And so we will be putting that up. My goal is by the end of April. It's already been in development and informed by some of our partners, but I think it's a really great way to pictorially explain potentially the 3 buckets for how a student may move through the math pathway and how that pathway interfaces with the senior quant requirement.
Yep. And so last but not least, you can see now I put the full 4-year look up there for you, and I color-coded the names of the courses with the diagram on the left, so you can see how all 24 of these classes are meeting the grad recs, as well as the yellow highlighting meeting, they are meeting their CATRs. So last but not least, I want to let Lisa jump in here. She's going to talk about some transcripting issues, and I just also wanted to make sure with regards to the previous slide, the Washington Student Achievement Council also creates a really great resource for you that is a one-stop shop chart that shows high school grad recs with 4-year public admissions and NC2A requirements. And so if you've got students that you're advising in that 3rd layer of coursework and how it counts, this is a really great document, and it's on their Ready, Set, Grad website, and it's just a 1-page chart that you can access to help students with those requirements as well. And so take it away, Lisa, with what we should be aware of when it comes to transcripts and designators.
You had some questions.
Yep. So one of the questions is civics can't be integrated into governments. Maybe can civics be integrated into governments?
Right, and Andrea, I would ask you to send that question to Carol Coe directly here at OSPI. She is our program supervisor for social studies, and I want to make sure you get the most accurate answer. My understanding is that civics and government have a lot of correlation and connection in their curriculum, but there are certain standards that must be met for the civics to be counted. And so it may take some crosswalking with your curriculums there to ensure that you're meeting the appropriate standards in those courses. But Carol Coe is our expert in that area here at OSPI, and she would be your best person to send that question to directly.
And then another question, do the 3 different CATRs have to be 3-year long courses?
So Andrea, if I'm understanding you correctly, as we put in our previous slide, 1.0 high school credit is equal to a CATR. So the CATRs are full 1.0 credits. If your student is getting them in a 0.5 one semester and then a 0.5 another semester that's disconnected, as long as they are meeting the CATRs, that's fine. It doesn't necessarily have to be in that same year, but you do need to meet the overall credit requirements. So I hope that answered your question. And we're going to go ahead and let Lisa take it away so we are mindful of our time for our last guest here, who we're going to talk to you about admissions directly. So Lisa.
Great, thanks everybody. Just a real high-level run through on transcript consideration. Hold on just a moment. Plug here for a moment, but that might be better because, you know, you may not want to hear what I have to say. Unmute your speaker.
I'm just double checking.
We're going to do a check. Can anybody hear us right now?
Somebody send us a yes, we can hear you. Just real quick, can somebody type that in if you can hear us? Oh, Lord. Okay, good. We're good. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Small technical difficulty here for a moment. Here we go. We're okay, thank you.
All right.
All right, so first on the screen right here, we have an OSPI, so the terms might be synonymous with each other. We call these course designation codes, and this is how OSPI learns about the assignment to courses, whether they are AP, there's a cater, and how that information is provided to us. And it's also the key to how this information should be appearing on your high school transcript. And as a side note, we are currently working on finalizing the updates to the transcript FAQ document and user guide. So hopefully within the next couple of weeks, this information will be posted. We'll have some new college and high school information, et cetera. So watch for that information to be posted fairly soon online. So first, this is what we would expect to see, and this is really an extract from the transcript user guide, section 2.2.3, academic record. Using some of the information that's actually currently coming into OSPI, we've got a great number of courses. As Kim pointed out, people are fairly creative sometimes in their course names. So, you know, that's the importance of the transcript identifiers, the course designation codes, and the state course codes. And as part of that transcript information, in addition to the letter grade, credits attempted, and credits earned, is your course designation. This is a pretty standard senior year course choices, but there's a couple items in here that should not be combined with each other or are not appropriate to be assigned to a course. And so we're going to give you a sec to take a look at this. It's kind of like the old, can you guess which one does not belong? So, okay, so if we can go to the next page here, it's just the cover over of this one. Can you find the mistakes? The biggest notation here, if you'll know, you can't report advanced placement, cater, quantitative, and science lab for one course.
Well, it had the Cambridge with it also. So
that's right, it had the and the Cambridge with it was also. So you might want to check, and I believe most of the student information systems have the ability to create reports for you that indicate all the course designation codes that are being submitted for your multiple courses. It probably would be at the course catalog or course offerings level. You might want to work with your student information staff to review what's being submitted for all of your courses. So we've removed the K. So now these are appropriate, but again, we have the B for cater and the Q for the quantitative designation.
So I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to champion this question for our higher ed admissions folks. And that is there a way for the cater, specifically the science cater, to add a descriptor on that flags it as the algebra-based science cater?
That's a great question. And I think we're going to have to take it back and look at possibly adding some new designations, or if it would be appropriate to do so. And it might be, actually I should say we would like the input from the higher ed folks, is whether they're more comfortable using a combination of the course description and the science lab to make that determination, or if it's important for them in that course designation code to have that pointed out by the districts. And if that's really what they're looking for, I think we'll need to take this back internally and discuss with Kim and a lot of the other folks as to whether that's an appropriate change and if we can make that when that should be made for students.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
And Kim, do you have anything else to add on that?
No, I think anytime we've got changes to make, it takes a little while. So appreciate Julia sending that in, and just wanted to show this as a quick example of the importance of these designators. This is how we draw a lot of our information out of CEDARS. So it's really important that we make sure those are accurate. And with that, I want to make sure we move on and get our guests that are online here with us to join in the conversation and share their expertise. So.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name, just to restate, is James. Sorry.
Matt or James, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, that's me. Hi, this is James Miller. I'm the Director of Admissions at the University of Washington, Bothell. My colleague, Matt Siskey, will be on in just a moment in a few slides here. Thank you all again for being with us today. We really appreciate the opportunity to obviously present this information with you all, but also what's that?
Give us just a sec to see if we can get a little help from our expert. And in the meantime, if you have any questions on what was just presented, please remember you can go ahead and send those in. And you can hear James. Oh, they can hear James. We can't hear James. Well, James, you just keep going, because apparently they can hear you and we can't, but you go. You guys finish it up and we'll figure out.
Okay, okay, thanks everyone. So just again to restate, we're really happy to be with you all today and to have the opportunity to collaborate with you in this really important work of helping your awesome students matriculate and become our awesome students at our colleges and universities here in the state of Washington. So first of all, just a quick overview of Washington's public baccalaureate system. Something I always like to share is that I've worked at a variety of institutions before UW-Bothell, and most recently was actually at an Independent Colleges of Washington member. So one of the awesome things about this state is the incredible diversity of institutions that are available to students. Obviously, you have the 6 institutions with a presence in all 39 counties. You know, and amazing service opportunities throughout the system. And some of our institutions, like the University of Washington, Central Washington, Eastern, and others, have formal locations. So the 4 campuses, the formally named campuses, are UW-Bothell, UW-Tacoma, Washington State University, Tri-Cities, and Vancouver. In addition to that, 21 community and technical colleges have academic partnerships with the Washington Public Baccalaureate schools of some sort or another. So it's important for you to know that we're always working with our community and technical college colleagues to make good connections for students so that the pathways to a 4-year degree are as diverse as possible. Some of the brag points, obviously, are that we've got 25,000 degrees awarded over the course of 2015-16.
But we don't know. Yeah, for some reason.
And the diversity of students that our institutions serve. Over 1/3 of all students receive a state need grant or Pell Grant. 44% of students identify as non-white. So we're moving on now to the role of admissions officers. And we always use the terminology admissions officer versus admissions recruiter. Because the idea of an admissions officer is broader than just recruitment and communicating directly. Obviously, we play a key role in the review of prospective student applications, particularly those of us who have fully holistic review processes, meaning we review more than basic requirements, GPA, and test scores and setting minimums. We obviously communicate with and advise your students throughout the process, from their interest as a prospective student all the way through to the decision to enroll. We play a really key role in providing inspiration and education around the importance of higher education and the importance particularly of attending a Washington Public Baccalaureate institution, if at all possible. We collaborate with our colleagues at the Washington Student Achievement Council, the Council of Presidents, and other stakeholders to determine minimum admission requirements. You know, we will obviously have to be accountable to the cadres in the same way our colleagues at high schools are. And so we pay careful attention to also coordinate with colleagues and stakeholders across the state when we're making changes to our admissions requirements or new processes. Finally, we are responsible for creating relationships and collaborations with our friends in the college and career counseling community, CBOs, and other community influencers. You know, making sure that we're reaching students where they are, and if there's a pocket of students or a group of students that haven't been reached by one of our 4-year institutions, that we're working hard to establish those relationships. So when you're meeting those admissions counselors on the road, know that they've got a bigger job than just simple recruitment. They do a lot to ensure that students make it through the pathway, both in terms of direct advising and in terms of setting up and maintaining really good systems of enrollment. A couple of the things that we don't do that I know our colleagues wanted us to touch on, we do not determine what high school courses meet CATER requirements. That is in your roles as college counselors, as deans or VPs or vice presidents for academic affairs at your high school or curriculum at your high school. You are responsible as high schools for determining what high school courses meet CATER, and we are responsible for interpreting those high school courses and making sure we understand those transcripts. And then we also don't play a role really usually in the advising of students after enrollment. There's a full distribution of student life and advising professionals on the other side of the enrollment decision who take over for us once a student enrolls. So if we can move to the next slide, that is actually where we are going next. Is just a quick overview of the enrollment process. And I think we're still, folks, just to let you know, we're having a little bit of a problem communicating internally here. So our friends are working really hard on the other side to make sure we're all coordinated. So I just wanted to, at the request of our colleagues from OSPI, give you a quick overview of a year in the life of a prospective student onto the enrollment decision, and I'll move quickly through this. The big thing that we want to emphasize is that your student is going to work with a variety of folks in making an enrollment decision, and that generally in that prospective student phase, particularly when we're talking about the senior year leading into making a decision to enroll at a four-year college, the student is going to work primarily with the admissions office, which is going to be responsible for recruitment, aforementioned, marketing, the management of applications, supporting documents and the data that go with those applications and documents, and then ultimately rendering and communicating admissions decisions. And then what we do in admissions is, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing for students and the people that support them, is that the admissions office is oftentimes responsible for coalescing all the student services like financial aid, residency office, the office that collects immunization records, and the orientation office. We're often responsible for coalescing those services and providing them in a way that's helpful for students. However, when a student chooses to enroll, attends orientation, and registers, they move into an environment where they're now interacting with those services without our involvement. The other thing that certainly gets complex for those students' families sometimes is they've been working with a really friendly admissions office that shares freely with them what's happening with the student's process, and then the minute that student enrolls, a giant barrier comes up, which is FERPA, which is essentially our Federal Educational Right to Privacy Act, which serves to protect student records and keep the student record in the ownership of the student. So that sometimes gets a little bit complicated for parents and other support people who are helping students move through the enrollment process. Essentially, once a student attends orientation, our job in the university community is to connect them with the student services and student affairs offices, as well as academic affairs, to help them get connected with things like, where do I register? How do I get an exception for this course? How do I make sure that if I didn't meet that world language requirement and I got an exception for that, what do I need to do in order to satisfy that requirement? Academic affairs will be where our academic advising, our faculty, and our undergraduate research, amongst many other things, will live. So we've got a variety of services that students are going to be taking advantage of. The big thing to know in this slide is that we have one process that's really dedicated to the enrollment of a student, and then once that student makes that decision to enroll, there's a whole variety of services that really bloom out for that student to interact with. So if we can go to that next slide, we're going to bring my colleague Matt Siskey on to take us home.
All right, thank you, James, and I just want to echo James's initial introduction and really thanking for the opportunity to be here and to be able to answer questions in relationship to the work that you all do. And actually, if you wanted to bump back that one slide really quick, I just wanted to add to another piece that James was saying on this, in trying to really make a clear point that, our admissions counselors or admissions officers are out there on the road working with students. And we really work hard to develop the relationships with you, but also with the students as well. And as that first initial point of contact, we're really connected, and we are oftentimes fielding the questions. But I want to make sure that, that as an understanding, when we're having to say, we're no longer in that role or we're no longer responsible, particularly when it comes to things like financial aid, we can be supportive in that, in being able to connect the students. But as you can see through the diagram that James has put together, we really don't have any authority over it. So oftentimes when we're getting the questions about, why does the financial aid package look the way it does, or I feel like the student should get more, or if the EFC isn't where I expected it to be, where we can redirect that, we don't have the authority over it to make changes on that. And that's kind of an important piece. So we try to connect you with the best and most responsible people that can affect change or work within that. But really, it's out of our hands at that point. Next slide, please. So we're kind of asked to talk a little bit about kind of the current and emerging trends that are taking place in admissions, just so that you have more of an understanding of where we're at and things that you can kind of expect in the future. More and more institutions are looking at ways, and as you can imagine, with limited budgets and trying to outreach to as many students as possible, you'll find more and more institutions going with use of, for example, the Common App or the Coalition App. And I know the University of Washington has jumped on with the Coalition App as well. And really what that is allowing students is to access multiple institutions through a singular application. And what's nice about that is it takes some of that legwork out in one, filling out multiple applications that have differing questions on them, and really going to one that's going to satisfy the questions for all. And so there are those varieties. And so as those admissions counselors are out there visiting schools, I would check with them to double check to see if they are on, for example, that Coalition App, or they're utilizing the Common App as well. Some may use a Common App for specific departments. I know, at Central we typically use a Common App, or we're going to a Common App for international students, just because they're more familiar with it. But the idea behind all of those pieces is that we want to make the process as simple as possible for our prospective students who are applying in. And that kind of, we're leveraging all of those tools to really manage the enrollment in our changing demographics. Washington State is a very unique state with its students. We get a lot of families moving to Washington from out of state, with coming to work for the tech industries or Boeing or any of those fields. And so the demographics of our student population are ever changing, socioeconomically, through diversity aspects. And so we're looking at ways to really make sure we're reaching the market in a meaningful way. And so that may be having, for example, communications that are written in Spanish to meet our Latinx population, being a little bit more targeted and specific. So we leverage technology to really improve that process. And that's a key point. When I first started this in this role in admissions 16 years ago, everything was print, and it was very generic, and the expectation was that it would meet the needs of all the potential applicants out there. But more institutions are going to more of a personalized model, utilizing email or text messaging to reach out to students in a more personalized way, very specific about their major or their interests, and what it may be like for them to come to our specific communities. But in knowing that, that's an important piece, is that oftentimes when students are filling out applications and they put an email address on there, oftentimes with the intent of, oh, I'll probably get some spam email. Realistically, this is a formal way in which we are communicating with students. And so students need to be aware of that, and you need to be aware of that as well too, because oftentimes login information and even sometimes admissions decisions are made and sent out through email. And those are considered our formal way of contact. It doesn't mean that paper pieces are going away. because we know how parents really like to hold something in their hand. But from a student's perspective, and really when it comes down to those FERPA regulations, we need to be communicating directly with the student in some of those areas. And so we'll be sending those directly to them. So really keying up how important our new modes of communication, whether that be email, text messaging, Facebook, that those are really becoming the landmark ways in which we communicate. Driving on to some of our cater myths and facts. The biggest piece that when we look at facts is, I think there's this misconception that students oftentimes, if they complete the caters, that they're automatically guaranteed to enroll in a four-year institution. That's not true. The fact is that caters do not guarantee admissions. What caters do is they really set a student's level of preparedness to be academically successful at an institution. And as a minimum admissions requirements, as we saw earlier, there are SATs and ACTs included in that, or a school may choose to go above and beyond the minimum cater requirements when they're looking at admissions policies. And so some of the myths that we have is that institutions prioritize one form of dual credit over another. Realistically, when we're looking at students, we're looking at academic preparedness, and anything that a student can be doing to help prepare themselves for the rigors that they'll face in college is really what's important to us, because we go through more of a holistic review of our applicants to see how that has been met. Each student may have a different pathway in which they're coming to us, but looking at that they're going to be able to be successful in the classroom once they've arrived is what's most important. Running Start, AP, and IB is not always the most important thing. It is college credit, but more importantly, it's the preparedness that they're gaining through those classes. So just because a student takes those specific courseworks, it's more meaningful that a student is successful in those as they're going through it. The best way to college is immediately enrolling in a four-year institution after high school. Really, that's just one path. A lot of students may take a gap year, or they may go to one of our CTCs after high school, or they may go to another four-year and then transfer in. It's not really where a student begins on the path, it's more of the end, that they're actually graduating with a degree. And so we look at students through that holistic review to gain access to our institutions. And if a student's looking at one of those pathways, it's important that they're contacting us so that we can help guide them on what's going to be the best route. College admissions is not all about GPA, it's not all about test scores, and going back to that holistic review, GPA and test scores are a part of that, but realistically what we're looking at is a well-rounded student that is prepared for college. And so we look at all of those pieces and how a student is prepared, grade trends, we look at the types of classes they take and the rigor that they face as well. And the last point says most colleges are becoming so selective that no one gets in. I chuckle when I see that. What students have to understand is, depending on the school that they're looking at, is the competition for getting into it. Each school is going to be looking at their applicants in a different way. Some have a pooling-based admissions, or some have a rolling-based admissions. And depending on their application process, that can dictate how competitive it is to get into that particular school. So with that, I will wrap up, and if we have any particular questions, I'll open it up and turn it back over to our presenters for some questions.
So for the sake of time, we'll take one or two questions. I think we've answered most that are in the queue right now, but if there's one or two outstanding questions, you want to type those in at the moment? Okay, so if you have questions after this presentation, here are some of the contacts that you can reach out to with your specific questions. Myself, Kim, Julie Garver up there represents the Council of Presidents, so she can connect you to both Matt and James, who have presented today. Joyce Hammer and Ruben Flores, who represent SBCTC, if you should have questions around on their processes. And so we want to thank all of our presenters today. It looks like Kim has one thing she wants to mention.
Yeah, I just
before we
wanted to add, if
close.
you have specific questions around transcripting or any of the information that Lisa talked about, the best course would be to email studentinformation@k12.wa.us, and that will get you to our team here and they'll answer your question.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for your time, and we will talk to you later. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Take care.